That money was everything to you, wasn't it?
So was his life.
She spent her last savings on a child she didn't know. 3 weeks later, her shop is empty. And the man who watched that day is standing outside. Welcome to Golden Heart Stories. This is the story of that choice. The metal shutter scraped down across the security bars with its evening rhythm. Thandi McQuaina wiped her hands on her apron, watching the last customers drift from her spaza shop near Kyalicha station. At 36 years old, she moved with economical grace born from necessity. The shop was hers. 4 years of hotel. Laundry shifts condensed into this concrete box with barred windows. Movement caught her eye. A boy stood at the edge of the concrete apron. Maybe 10 or 11, clothes hanging loose on a thin frame. But he wasn't looking at the food visible through the bars. His eyes tracked the customers, following their movements. With an intensity that raised the hair on Thandi's arms. The stillness unsettled her most. No fidgeting, just controlled breathing. His shirt had faded to dishwater gray. Bare feet showed deep cracks at the heels. When the last customer, an elderly woman with meal shuffled past, the boy stepped aside with automatic deference until she disappeared around the corner. The street emptied. Evening sounds rose, taxi engines at the rank, gospel music. From a radio, a dog barking. The boy waited until silence settled before moving 3 steps forward, stopping where Thandi's property ended. "Water," he said. "Please, ma'am. Just water. Not begging. Just transaction." Thandi's fingers tightened on her keys. "Only water? Nothing else?" "Yes, ma'am. Only water." The formality struck her. Most kids would have said auntie. "Where are you coming from?" The boy's shoulders tensed. "From the roads, ma'am." "And your family? Your mother?" "I don't have anyone to ask, ma'am. That's why I'm asking you." His voice stayed flat, controlled. Thandi studied him, the way he balanced on the balls of his feet, ready to run. How his eyes tracked her hands but never met her face. The scrape on his elbow, red and dirt-crusted. She unlocked the shutter and ducked inside. The boy remained outside, watching through the bars. Thandi grabbed a bottle from the cooler and half a loaf of brown bread. When she came back out, she held both toward him. "Here, take both." The boy took the water first, fingers careful not to touch hers. "The bread too?" "Yes. You look like you need it." "Thank you, ma'am." No smile. No gratitude beyond the words. He tucked the bread under his arm and drank in controlled sips. That spoke of lessons learned about scarcity. "What's your name?" The boy lowered the bottle, water glistening on his lip. "Does it matter, ma'am? I'm giving you food. I'd like to know who I'm helping." "Names don't change hunger." The response came quick, practiced. Before Thandi could push further, a voice cut through the dusk. "Thandi, you feeding strays now? Starting a charity?" Mama Zola emerged from the salon next door, hands wrapped in a towel, processing chemicals sharp in the air. She was older than Thandi by a decade, quicker with judgments. The boy's body went rigid. "Just giving water, Mama Zola. Nothing more. Water today, food tomorrow, then they're sleeping in your storeroom. Telling all their friends you're soft. You see boys like this, acting all quiet and respectful? Those are the ones you watch carefully. Boys who don't beg properly are usually hiding bigger trouble. Trust me on this." The boy's face showed nothing. But his fingers tightened around the bottle until it crackled. "He's just a child," Thandi said, defensive. "So were the ones who robbed the Somalian shop last month. Your kindness, your funeral. Don't say I didn't warn you properly." The salon door swung shut. The boy turned and walked away with measured pace, not running, just removing himself from hostility. Thandi watched him disappear into the back streets. She stood alone, keys heavy in her hand. When she locked up, streetlights were flickering on, casting weak yellow light. She walked home through familiar streets, greeting neighbors, dodging potholes, but her mind stayed elsewhere. It circled back to the boy's face, not the hunger or dirt, but the absolute absence of expectation in his eyes. He'd asked for water as if he already knew the answer would be no. As if hope was a luxury he'd learned to live without years ago. That night, lying in her narrow bed, with traffic sounds filtering through the window, Thandi couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. She told herself it was paranoia. Mama Zola's warnings taking root in tired soil. But sleep came slowly, and when it did, She dreamed of locked doors that wouldn't hold and a boy who never blinked. Standing just beyond reach, always waiting, watching in the shadows. Underneath the unease ran a question she didn't want to examine too closely. Why had she given him bread at all? Why not just water and a closed door? Despite every warning and survival instinct sharpened by years in the township. Something in that careful, guarded child had reached past her defenses in a way she couldn't explain. The next afternoon, Thandi looked up from sorting stock and found him there again. Same corner of the concrete apron. Same careful distance from the entrance. Same hour when the lunch rush had ended but evening customers hadn't yet arrived. The boy stood with his hands at his sides. Not fidgeting, not shifting weight, waiting with the patience of someone who'd learned that movement drew unwanted attention. She'd half convinced herself he wouldn't return. But here he was, and the precision of his positioning sent an odd chill through her chest. He hadn't chosen this spot randomly. He'd calculated the space where he could be seen but not intrusive. She stepped outside. The boy's eyes tracked her movement but he didn't speak first. He simply stood, waiting for permission that might never come. The afternoon heat pressed down, making the air shimmer above cracked pavement. "You came back," she said. The boy nodded once. His feet remained planted several steps from where her property began. Never crossing boundaries without invitation. Never sitting on her step. Standing cost energy he could barely afford, but the rules he followed seemed more important than comfort. Thandi noticed patterns. He never reached toward the shop. Never peered through the bars at food inside. Never asked twice for anything. These weren't the behaviors of a child testing limits. These were survival rules, carved into him by experiences she could only imagine. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice softer now. The boy's jaw tightened. His eyes shifted away, focusing on a point past her shoulder. Seconds stretched between them. She thought he might not answer. "Lebo," he said finally, reluctant. His gaze remained averted, as if giving his name cost him something valuable. "Lebo," Thandi repeated. The name made him reel in a way yesterday's silence hadn't. "Where do you sleep, Lebo?" His shoulders went rigid. The question touched something raw. Lebo's hands curled into loose fists, not aggressive but defensive. "Where do you sleep?" he asked back, his voice flat, deflecting. The response caught her off guard. Not defiance, but protective evasion, turning her question back to avoid answering. It spoke of practice, of countless adults who'd asked questions he couldn't afford to answer honestly. "I'm asking because I want to know you're safe," Thandi said, keeping her voice gentle. "That's all. Just wondering if you have somewhere warm at night. A place where you can rest properly." "Warm enough," Lebo said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I manage, ma'am. I've been managing for a while now." "And food? Do you eat every day? Real meals, not just scraps?" "When I can, ma'am. Same as everyone else around here." "That's not really an answer, Lebo. I asked if you eat every day." "It's the only answer I have to give you, ma'am." His tone remained flat, but Thandi heard the finality in it. A door closing. A boundary she couldn't cross, not yet, maybe not ever. She felt something shift in her understanding. She'd seen lazy children before, kids who begged because it was easier than working. Lebo wasn't that. His careful rules, his measured distance, his reluctance to take up space, these weren't laziness. They were the architecture of someone shaped by profound loss. "I have some leftover bread," Thandi said, breaking the tension. "From yesterday's baking. It's going to waste anyway." Lebo's eyes flickered to hers briefly, then away. He didn't move forward, just stood there, waiting for her to decide, giving her all the power because he'd learned he had none. She went inside and returned with bread and water. When she held them out, Lebo stepped forward the exact distance needed to accept them, then immediately stepped back. Never presuming, never taking more space than given. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, automatic, learned. "Will you come back tomorrow?" Thandi asked, surprising herself with the question. Lebo hesitated, studying her face for signs of a trap, looking for the catch he'd learned always existed. "Is it allowed, ma'am? You won't get in trouble for helping me?" "Yes, it's allowed. And no, I won't get in trouble." "Then yes, ma'am. Same time tomorrow. If that's all right with you." "Why the same time? Why not earlier, when there's more food left over from lunch?" "Because this time, there's no crowd." No one watching. No one asking questions about who I am or where I come from. The honesty in that answer struck her hard. He'd chosen invisibility over abundance, safety over plenty. Thandi nodded slowly, understanding more than he'd meant to reveal. Same time tomorrow then, she said. Lebo turned and walked away with measured pace. Not running despite his hunger. Not rushing despite his need. Just removing himself from her space with careful courtesy. Thandi stood in the doorway long after he'd disappeared, understanding that this boy's story was written on his body in ways words couldn't capture. In the rules he followed so carefully. In the space he refused to claim. In the way loss had taught him to make himself small enough to survive. Tomorrow, she knew, he would return. Same time, same place, following the same unspoken rules that kept him alive. On the third day, when Lebo appeared at his usual spot, Thandi made a decision that felt both right and dangerous. She emerged from the shop carrying a broom and held it out toward him. The boy's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in his careful composure. The front needs sweeping, she said, keeping her voice neutral. If you do it properly, there's food left from lunch. Fair exchange. You interested? Lebo stared at the broom for a long moment, then reached out and took it with careful hands. Yes, ma'am. I can do it well. I promise. Without a word, he began sweeping the concrete apron with methodical strokes, each movement deliberate and thorough. He worked with focused intensity, pushing dust into careful piles, reaching corners she usually ignored. Thandi watched from the doorway, arms crossed. This was simple fairness, she told herself. Work for food. But watching Lebo sweep with such diligence, she understood she'd crossed a line. The boy wasn't just getting food now. He was becoming visible, associated with her shop. She was still watching when Mrs. Kumalo approached, her leather handbag clutched tight. The older woman was a regular customer, but today her steps slowed, her eyes fixing on Lebo with hard assessment. Afternoon, Mrs. Kumalo, Thandi said, forcing brightness into her voice. The usual today? Mrs. Kumalo didn't move toward the entrance. Her gaze stayed locked on Lebo. You're hiring now? Taking on street children to work your shop? He's just sweeping the front, Thandi said, defensive. Nothing more than that. Nothing more. Today it's sweeping. Tomorrow he's inside, near the till, near the stock. You know what happened to the Patel family's store, don't you? Started just like this. The words hung in the air. Thandi felt her jaw tighten, anger and shame mixing. Lebo isn't stealing anything. He's earning food honestly. Honestly. You don't know where he comes from. What he's running from. What trouble follows him. Mrs. Kumalo adjusted her handbag, stepping backward. I don't feel safe shopping here anymore. Not with people like that hanging around. You'll lose more than just my business if you keep this up. The dismissal in those words, people like that, made Thandi's hands curl into fists. Mrs. Kumalo, please. He's just a child who needs help. A child today, a problem tomorrow. I'm warning you, Thandi. This will cost you. Before Thandi could respond, Mrs. Kumalo turned and walked away, shoes clicking sharp against pavement. A customer lost. Income gone. The cost of kindness calculated in real time. Thandi stood frozen. When she turned back, Lebo had resumed sweeping, but his movements had changed. Faster now, less careful, as if trying to finish and disappear. His shoulders hunched forward, making himself smaller. The rest of the afternoon passed in tense silence. 2 more regular customers came, bought their items, but Thandi noticed their glances toward Lebo, the way they hurried transactions. When the last one left, she locked the door and moved to the till, dreading what the count would reveal. The numbers didn't lie. She was down nearly 200 rand from her usual daily take. Not catastrophic, but enough to feel immediately. The money she'd planned for restocking gone. The small buffer for unexpected expenses eroded. She stood with cash in her hands, feeling consequences settle on her shoulders. Outside, through the security bars, she could see Lebo had finished sweeping. He stood holding the broom, waiting. But when their eyes met, something in her expression must have shown because his face shifted, understanding crossing it. Thandi brought out bread and fruit, more than planned, trying to compensate for the judgment he'd endured. But when she handed it to him, Lebo's usual quiet thanks came out different. Strained. Aware. I made trouble for you, he said, not quite a question. No, Thandi lied. You did good work. But Lebo's eyes held hers, and she saw he knew. Knew about the customer who'd left. Knew about her calculations. Knew his presence cost more than leftover food. Thank you, ma'am, he said, and walked away. The next day, he didn't come. Nor the day after. The concrete apron stayed dusty, untouched. Thandi found herself watching for him at the usual hour, her hands stilling in tasks, her eyes drawn to the empty space where he should have been standing. The absence troubled her in ways she didn't want to examine. She told herself it was relief. One less complication. But when the third day came and went with no sign of him, something cold settled in her stomach that had nothing to do with lost income. It was the understanding that Lebo had learned, once again, to make himself invisible. That even earned kindness had costs too high to sustain. That even when you followed the rules and worked for your food, you could still be the problem people wanted gone. She stood in her shop doorway as evening fell, looking at the space where a boy with careful boundaries should have been standing, and felt the absence like a wound. When Lebo returned on the fourth day, Thandi felt relief flood through her. He appeared at his usual spot during the quiet afternoon lull, standing with the same careful posture. But something had shifted. The 3 days of absence hung in the air like unspoken acknowledgement. Thandi stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. She studied him, taking in details she'd noticed but never questioned. The way he positioned himself to see multiple exits. The tension he carried even when standing still. I was worried when you didn't come back, she said. Lebo's eyes flickered to hers briefly, then away. He didn't respond, just stood waiting. Thandi felt the weight of questions pressing against her restraint. She'd told herself it wasn't her business. But 3 days of absence had eroded her carefully maintained distance. Lebo, she said gently. Where's your family? Your mother, your father? The change in him was immediate. His body went rigid, every muscle locking into defensive stillness. His jaw clenched so tight she could see tension radiating into his temples. For several heartbeats, he didn't breathe. When he finally spoke, the words came out flat, rehearsed, empty of all emotion. My mother passed away last year. My father, I don't know where he is. I have relatives in the Eastern Cape but they cannot take care of me. The phrases sounded borrowed, assembled from pieces that might be true or might be protection. Each word carefully neutral, designed to end conversation. Thandi recognized the script immediately. This was what he told social workers, police, anyone who asked dangerous questions. Lebo, I'm not trying to get you in trouble. I just want to understand. I want to help. She took a small step forward as she spoke, trying to close the distance between them without seeming threatening. You are helping, ma'am. The food is enough. But it's not all you need. You need somewhere safe to sleep. I manage, ma'am. I've been managing fine. The firmness in his voice surprised her. Not defiant, but absolute, final. A boundary drawn as clear as the physical distance he maintained. Thandi felt the conversation closing, felt him retreating behind walls built from necessity. She was about to press further when Lebo turned, shifting his weight as if to leave. The movement was slight, barely a quarter turn, but it was enough. The afternoon sun hit his bare legs at a different angle, and Thandi's breath caught. Scars. Multiple scars running along his shins and calves, some old and faded to pale lines, others newer, still pink and raised. They weren't random childhood accidents. They were too many, too patterned. Burns, maybe. Or strikes from something thin and flexible. Marks that spoke of deliberate harm, repeated over time. Thandi's hand went to her mouth. Lebo must have sensed her reaction because he shifted again, angling his legs away, his body language screaming discomfort and shame. Lebo, what happened to your legs? Who did that? But he was already moving, walking away quickly. She stood frozen, wanting to call him back, wanting to demand answers. But her voice caught, paralyzed by sudden understanding of what those marks might mean. A minibus taxi rumbled past, slowing near her shop. The conductor, a middle-aged man she recognized, leaned out the window. That boy been hanging around your place a lot. You know his story? Thandi shook her head, still shaken. The conductor sucked his teeth. Children like that, they survive by staying invisible, you understand? The ones who draw attention, who get comfortable in one place too long, they get found. And getting found is never good for them. Found by who? Thandi asked, though part of her already knew. Whoever they're running from. Family that doesn't want them but doesn't want anyone else to have them either. Social workers who'll put them in places worse than the streets. People who use kids like that for things I won't say in daylight. He shrugged. You want to help him? Best thing you can do is not ask questions. Let him be invisible. The taxi pulled away, engine roaring. Thandi looked where Lebo had gone, but he'd already disappeared into the maze of pathways and shacks. She went back inside, but her hands trembled as she tried to organize stock, tried to focus. Tried to do anything that would stop her mind from circling back to those scars, to the memorized phrases he'd deployed like shields, to the way he'd learned to make himself small and untraceable. What had happened to him? What was he running from? And more terrifying, what would happen if whoever he was running from found him? The questions multiplied in her mind like shadows at dusk. She'd thought she was helping by offering food, by giving him work to maintain dignity. But what if her visibility, her questions, her kindness was the very thing that would expose him? The taxi conductor's words echoed. Stay invisible. Don't ask questions. But how could she not ask when she'd seen what was written on his skin? When she knew, with growing certainty, that whatever Lebo wasn't saying was far worse than anything he'd admitted. Thandi stood in her shop as afternoon faded, and felt fear settle deep into her bones. Not fear for herself or her business, but fear for a boy who'd learned that survival meant silence, that safety meant invisibility. And that trust could be the most dangerous thing of all. The decision came without thought. One evening, as Lebo turned to leave, Thandi felt her feet moving. She locked the shop quickly, then followed him. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows. Thandi used them to her advantage, keeping buildings between herself and the boy. Her heart hammered. This was wrong, a violation of trust. But the scars on his legs haunted her sleep. Lebo moved with purpose, navigating the terrain with practiced ease. He didn't look back, didn't check over his shoulder. His confidence in invisibility was absolute. He avoided main roads entirely. Where Thandi would have turned toward the taxi rank, Lebo slipped into narrow paths she'd never noticed. Spaces between buildings where two people couldn't walk side by side. Gaps in fencing cut or broken open. Thandi struggled to keep up. Her adult frame didn't fit through some spaces Lebo navigated with ease, forcing her to take longer routes around buildings and through yards, always terrified she'd lose sight of him. Sweat gathered at her temples, part exertion and part anxiety. What am I doing? She whispered to herself. This is madness. If he sees me, he'll never trust me again. But her feet kept moving. The paths grew narrower, more desolate. They passed through unfinished housing blocks standing like skeletal sentinels. Lebo wove between them with familiarity. He paused once, and Thandi's breath caught. She pressed against a wall. But Lebo wasn't looking for followers. He was checking something ahead, head tilted. After a moment, he continued forward. They walked for 20 minutes, moving deeper into areas where settlements gave way to abandoned structures. The sounds of the township faded. Then Lebo stopped before a building that made Thandi's stomach drop. A condemned community hall scheduled for demolition. Red letters spray painted across the front warned of danger. No, she breathed, the word barely audible. Please, not here. Not this place. It's not safe. It's going to collapse. How can he? But Lebo glanced around one final time, then slipped through the damaged door and disappeared inside. Thandi crept closer, positioning herself at a broken window. The interior was worse than suggested. Debris littered the floor, but in one corner, cleared of rubble, Lebo had created a living space. A threadbare blanket, a plastic bag with clothes, a water bottle, nothing else. She watched as Lebo set down his bag of food, placing it beside the blanket. Then he moved through a routine that made her throat constrict. He walked to each exit, testing doors and windows. Not once, but twice, circling the entire perimeter. He's just a child, Thandi whispered, her hand pressed against her mouth. Just a child, and he's living like this. Checking for escape routes like a prisoner. Like someone who knows danger could come at any moment. What has he survived? What is he still surviving? Only after completing this ritual did he sit. Even then, he didn't relax. He sat with his back against the wall, body tense, alert and watchful. Thandi understood with devastating clarity what she was witnessing. This wasn't a child finding shelter. This was a hunted animal checking its den. Lebo had learned that safety was temporary, that sleep required preparation. She backed away from the window, legs trembling with the weight of what she'd witnessed. That condemned building, that cleared corner with its minimal belongings, that constant watchfulness. This was where Lebo went when darkness fell. This was home. Thandi walked back through darkening streets, mind replaying the routine. A neighbor called out as she passed, Mrs. Delamini from 3 houses down. "Thandi, you all right? You look shaken, like you've seen a ghost or something." "I'm fine," she managed, her voice coming out rough. "Just tired from a long day at the shop. Customer problems, you know how it is. These late hours will kill you, girl. Running that place all by yourself, no help, no rest. You need to take care of yourself." "I know, Mrs. Delamini. I know. And be careful walking alone this time of evening. These streets aren't safe after dark. Too many bad elements around these days. Young boys with nothing to do but make trouble." The words stung, though the older woman couldn't know why. "I'll be careful. Thank you. Get some rest then. You look like you need it." Safe. The word echoed in Thandi's mind as she continued walking. What did safe mean to a boy sleeping in a condemned building? What did rest mean when you checked exits twice before allowing yourself to sit down? By the time she reached her own home's solid walls, a door that locked, a safe bed, shame burned in her throat. She'd thought she was helping by giving him food. But food wasn't enough. She'd followed him to understand. And now understanding sat heavy on her shoulders, demanding something more than bread and sympathy. But what? What could she do for a boy who trusted no one, who'd built his existence around remaining invisible? "I can't just give him food anymore," she said aloud to the empty street. "I can't pretend that's enough. Not after seeing this. But if I try to help more, he'll run. He'll disappear. And then what?" Thandi stood in her doorway, looking back toward that condemned hall, where a child slept among rubble and debris, and felt the weight of choices she hadn't yet made. The next morning arrived with clear light. She'd barely slept, her mind cycling through images of Lebo checking exits. She'd risen before dawn and pulled a worn winter jacket from her closet. The jacket sat folded over her arm as she walked toward her shop, heart hammering. Today she would speak plainly. She reached the shop early, unlocking with trembling hands. The morning routine felt hollow. Stock shelves, check till, arrange the small display near the counter. But her eyes kept drifting to the jacket hung on her chair, and to the street beyond the bars where Lebo would appear. Except when she finally saw him, something was wrong. He moved differently, his careful navigation replaced by something urgent, reckless. He walked too close to the road, too focused on whatever pulled him forward. Thandi felt alarm spike through her chest even before she understood why. She was already moving when it happened. A minibus taxi came around the corner too fast, driver distracted or careless. Lebo stepped off the curb without checking, without that careful awareness he usually maintained. The driver shouted, brakes screaming. But there wasn't enough distance, enough time to stop. The impact wasn't catastrophic. A glancing blow, the taxi's side mirror catching Lebo's shoulder and spinning him backward. He went down hard, his head striking concrete. He jumped right out. Boy just walked into the road. You were speeding. Kid came out of nowhere. Thandi pushed through the gathering crowd. Lebo lay on the pavement, conscious but stunned, blood seeping from a cut above his eyebrow. Move, she snapped. Get out of the way. The crowd pressed closer, voices rising. Someone was filming. Someone else shouted about insurance. Everyone's a witness. Is anyone calling an ambulance? Thandi dropped beside Lebo, her hands hovering. Blood ran down his face. His shoulder looked wrong, bent at an angle that suggested damage. Lebo, can you hear me? Can you move? He blinked, seemed to focus on her face. His lips moved but no sound came. Don't try to talk. Just stay still. Ambulance will take too long. Clinic's closer. The taxi should take him. I'm not putting him in my taxi. The argument escalated while Lebo lay bleeding. Thandi felt something cold settle in her chest. She slid her arms under Lebo's body, feeling him flinch. He was lighter than expected, all bone and desperation. She staggered under his weight, started walking toward the taxi rank. Where are you taking him? To the clinic. That's not my taxi. Open the door. A young man pulled open the sliding door. Thandi climbed in, settling Labo across the back seat, his head in her lap. Blood soaked into her skirt. Clinic, she told the driver. Now, that's 7 rand per person. I'll pay. Just drive. The taxi pulled away. Through the window, Thandi saw the jacket lying forgotten on the shop floor. None of it mattered except the boy bleeding in her lap. The clinic appeared after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Thandi carried Labo through doors that swung open on complaining hinges, into a waiting area packed with people. A nurse looked up from paperwork, her expression shifting from irritation to sharp assessment. What happened? Hit by a taxi. He's bleeding. His shoulder might be broken. The nurse came around the desk, examined Labo with professional efficiency. He needs to go to the hospital. We can't handle this here. Head injury, possible fracture. Then send him. The hospital requires payment guarantee. Do you have medical aid? No. Then you'll need to pay up front. 1200 rand minimum for admission and initial treatment. The number hit Thandi like a physical blow. 1200 rand. Her entire savings scraped together over the past year, saved for the deposit on a better location for her shop. She looked down at Lebo's face, at the blood still seeping from his eye, at the way he'd gone still in her arms. How many times had he been hurt with no one to help? How many close calls had he survived by sheer luck that was finally running out? I have 1200 rand at home, Thandi heard herself say. I'll get it. Just help him, please. The nurse's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. I can start basic treatment now. But the hospital won't take him without payment. Without that money, he stays here, and we can't do what he needs. Thandi understood. The money she'd saved to build a future was now the price of a child's immediate survival. There was no choice here, no real decision. There had never been a choice, not from the moment she'd seen him collapse. Start treating him, she said. I'll be back with the money within the hour. She laid Labo gently on the examination table, her hands leaving blood smears on the paper covering. Then she walked back out into the morning sun, toward her home and the coffee tin that held every hope she'd managed to save. Thandi walked faster, then broke into a run, her shop keys jangling in her pocket. All her careful plans, her determination to confront truth with words, none of it mattered now. Sometimes truth didn't wait for the right moment. Sometimes it arrived in violence and blood, demanding answers you'd never planned to give, choices you'd never imagined. And sometimes saving someone meant sacrificing the future you'd spent years building. Thandi returned to the clinic within the hour, the coffee tin tucked under her arm. Her hands trembled as she approached the nurse's station. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, lay 1200 rand. The nurse looked up, recognition in her tired eyes. Thandi set the tin on the counter. Here, 1200 rand. For the boy. The nurse unwrapped the money, counted it carefully. This covers the transfer. They'll take him now. You saved him. How long until he's moved? 10, maybe 15 minutes. The ambulance is on its way. Within minutes, orderlies were moving Labo to a treatment room. The clinic transformed into controlled chaos. The waiting area remained packed, a woman arguing about insurance, a man demanding to see a doctor, children crying. Then something shifted. The woman arguing about insurance lowered her voice mid-sentence. The man demanding attention turned toward the entrance, his posture changing from aggressive to watchful. A nurse who'd been walking with casual fatigue suddenly straightened her uniform, smoothing wrinkles that hadn't bothered her moments before. The room didn't go quiet, but the quality of sound changed. Voices dropped to murmurs. People adjusted positions, creating space where none had existed. Through the clinic's glass doors, Thandi saw a black SUV pull to a stop in front of the entrance. The vehicle was clean, windows tinted dark. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out with the kind of calm that comes from certainty. Perhaps 45, dressed in a dark suit. No urgency, no hesitation. The glass doors opened. He entered. People moved. Not dramatically, but they moved nonetheless. The corridor that had been impassable now had a clear path. The nurse who'd straightened her uniform approached him before he'd taken 3 steps inside. Sir, how can we help you today? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes moved across the crowded waiting area with methodical assessment. The child who was brought in earlier. Traffic accident. Where is he being treated? The nurse consulted nothing. She already knew. This way, sir. He's stable now. The doctor is with him. Would you like me to? Just show me where he is. Of course. Follow me, please. The man nodded once and followed her. Medical staff who'd been rushing moments before now moved aside. No one questioned his presence. No one asked him to wait or fill out forms. They simply accommodated him. Thandi rose from her plastic chair, her legs moving before her mind caught up. She followed at a distance, watching as the man was led to a window that looked into the treatment room, where Lebo lay on a narrow bed, his head bandaged, his arm in a sling. A clerk approached Thandi, clipboard in hand. Are you family? We need consent forms signed for the hospital transfer. I'm the one who brought him in. I paid for treatment. But are you family? Legal guardian? No. I'm helping him. The clerk made a note, then moved away without further questions. The man stood by the glass and watched. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He simply observed with focused intensity. Thandi felt it then, the fundamental difference between herself and this stranger. She was someone who asked for help, who counted coins and hoped they'd be enough. This man was someone people moved for. His presence alone created a gravitational field that bent the normal rules. She wondered who he was, what connection he had to Lebo. But she didn't approach him. Something in the way he stood suggested questions would not be welcome. The doctor emerged from the treatment room, saw the man, and immediately altered his trajectory to approach him first, despite Thandi standing closer. Sir, the boy is stable. Fractured collarbone, concussion, 7 stitches in the scalp. He'll need follow-up care, but the immediate danger has passed. We're preparing him for transfer to the hospital now. The man nodded, his expression revealing nothing. How long will recovery take? 6 to 8 weeks for the collarbone. The concussion should resolve sooner if he rests properly. He'll need monitoring. Good. Make sure he gets what he needs. Of course, sir. We'll ensure proper handover to the hospital team. Thank you. That was all. 2 words that communicated both gratitude and dismissal. The doctor returned to his duties. Thandi stood in the corridor, watching the man watch Lebo, and felt the distance between them like a chasm she'd never learned to cross. She'd given everything she had to save this child. But this man, whoever he was, hadn't needed to give anything. His presence alone had shifted the room. He turned then, as if sensing her observation. Their eyes met for a brief moment. He didn't smile or nod or acknowledge her beyond that single glance. Then he walked past her, back through the corridor that parted for him once again, out through the glass doors to the black SUV that waited. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, merging into traffic. And as it disappeared, the clinic seemed to exhale. Voices rose again. The nurse's posture relaxed. People resumed their complaints. But Thandi remained still, staring at the space where the man had stood, understanding something about the different kinds of power that existed, the power of money she'd just surrendered, and the power of presence she'd just witnessed, which required no payment at all. Lebo stabilized over the following week, but stability came with a price. The hospital discharged him after 5 days with a list of requirements: follow-up appointments, X-rays, physical therapy, pain medication, bandages, antiseptic. Each item cost money. Each appointment required taxi fare. Thandi paid for everything, watching her savings evaporate. The doctor handed her a prescription at the 3rd follow-up visit. He'll need this for another month. The collarbone is healing well, but we want to prevent inflammation. How much will this cost? Around 300 rand. You can get it at any pharmacy. 300 rand she didn't have. 300 more after the 200 for today's appointment, the 150 for the taxi, the 80 for the new sling. The arithmetic of depletion had its own relentless logic. Within 3 weeks, the coffee tin was empty. Thandi stood in her kitchen one evening, holding the tin in both hands. She opened it one final time. Nothing remained but the metallic smell of coins. She carried it to her bedroom, knelt beside the dresser, and placed it at the back of the bottom drawer underneath old photographs. She pushed the drawer closed and did not open it again. The shop lasted another 2 weeks. Without capital to restock, the shelves grew emptier each day. Customers noticed immediately. Thandi, when will you have bread again? My children need breakfast. Soon. There's a delay with suppliers. What kind of delay? The other shops have bread. I'm working on it. Maybe next week. Another customer approached the next day, an older woman Thandi had known for years. Where's all your stock? This place looks empty. Just restocking. Taking time to find better prices. Better prices? Or no money to buy anything? The question hung in the air between them. Thandi couldn't answer. I understand, the woman said quietly. My sister went through this last year. Her shop closed too. I'm sorry. But people in the township understood financial ruin when they saw it. They recognized the particular emptiness of shelves that wouldn't be restocked. The last customer left on a Tuesday afternoon. Thandi locked up for the final time that evening, removed the key, and walked home. The shop sign hand-painted years ago leaned against the interior wall. Better to leave it there, a monument to choices that couldn't be unmade. At home, Lebo occupied space with careful precision. He woke early each morning and performed a ritual she recognized. He checked windows, tested locks, examined the doorframe. One afternoon, he finally broke his silence. The shop isn't opening again, is it? Thandi stopped washing dishes, her hands still in the water. No, it's closed. Because of me. Because you spent everything on the hospital. Because I chose to. That's different. But now you have nothing. No shop. No income. Nothing. She dried her hands slowly, choosing her words carefully. I have you. That was the choice I made. That's not a fair trade. A shop for a street kid you barely knew. Fair doesn't matter. It's already done. He was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as if chewing something bitter. What happens now? I don't know. But we'll figure it out. He never asked about the shop again after that. Never questioned why Thandi stayed home. Never mentioned the growing emptiness of the kitchen shelves, the meals that had become smaller. One morning, Thandi found him standing at the kitchen window, his injured arm still in its sling. What are you looking for? He didn't turn away from the window. Just looking. At what? Nothing specific. Just making sure I know what's out there. She understood then that he was preparing for the moment when this too would end. He was checking exits not because he wanted to go, but because he'd learned that staying was never guaranteed. The man from the clinic did not return. No black SUV appeared. No knock came. No phone call, no message, no explanation. Weeks passed with the silence of someone who'd observed what he needed and saw no reason to engage further. She thought about him at odd moments. Who was he? What was Lebo to him? But questions without answers eventually lost their urgency, replaced by the immediate demands of survival. One evening, sitting at the small kitchen table, Lebo eating rice and beans, Thandi felt understanding settle over her. The choice she'd made at the clinic was already paid for. Not just in money, but in the future she'd been building. The better shop location, the expansion, the climb toward security, all of it was gone. Traded for Lebo's life without hesitation, but gone nonetheless. Whatever came next, whether destitution or salvation, whether the man returned or remained absent. Whether she rebuilt or learned to survive on nothing, none of it could undo that transaction. The choice was made. The price was paid. Across the table, Lebo ate slowly, carefully. He didn't complain or ask for more. Every grain of rice mattered. Thandi watched him and thought, this is what I bought. Not his gratitude. Just this, his continued existence in a world that had tried to erase him. And if that was all the return she ever saw, it would have to be enough. Because it was already paid for. And payment, once rendered, became history rather than choice. Irreversible. Done. 3 days after the shop sign came down, Thandi stood at her kitchen window. Watching afternoon light slant across the township streets in geometric patterns that divided shadow from sun. Lebo sat at the table behind her, copying letters from an old newspaper with careful precision, his arm finally free of its sling. The silence between them had become comfortable. Then she saw it, the black SUV rolling slowly down the street, impossibly clean against the dusty landscape. Her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. The vehicle stopped in front of the closed shop, parking with precision. Thandi's hands gripped the sink edge hard enough that her knuckles went pale. Behind her, Lebo's pencil stopped. The driver's door opened. The same man emerged, dressed in a dark suit despite the afternoon heat. He surveyed the closed shop through the security bars, taking in the hand-painted sign leaning inside, the empty shelves visible through dusty glass. Then he turned toward Thandi's house as if he'd known all along this was where he needed to come. He walked across the street and knocked 3 times, the sound echoing through the small house. Thandi didn't move immediately. Her mind raced through possibilities. Debt collectors didn't drive vehicles like that. Social services didn't announce themselves with such quiet authority. This was someone connected to the mystery of who Lebo was and why a man in an expensive suit had appeared at the clinic only to vanish without explanation. She dried her hands on a cloth with movements that felt mechanical, walked through the small living room, and opened the door. The man stood on her threshold with the same calm presence from the clinic, but up close. She could see details she'd missed before: silver threading through his hair at the temples, lines around his eyes that suggested both age and careful observation. "Miss McQuena, my name is Daniel Maseko. May I come in?" His voice carried an educated accent, Zulu inflections softened by years of professional polish. Thandi stepped aside without speaking, allowing him entry into her small home. He entered without hesitation, without the subtle judgment that usually accompanied people of means visiting places of poverty. Lebo stood when Daniel entered, his posture defensive despite the careful neutrality of his expression. Daniel's eyes moved to him immediately, holding the boy's gaze with something that looked like recognition and regret tangled together. They stared at each other for a long moment, and the silence carried weight that spoke of history Thandi didn't understand. Thandi gestured toward the couch, but Daniel remained standing. "I'll be direct," Daniel said, his attention shifting to Thandi. "I understand you paid for Lebo's hospital treatment yourself." "The full amount." Thandi crossed her arms. "How do you know that?" "I made inquiries. The clinic keeps records." "And why?" "Because you took responsibility that should never have been yours." "It was mine. I arrived too late." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications Thandi didn't understand. Before she could ask, Daniel continued. "I run a regional investment foundation. We fund small businesses. It's my profession. But this was personal. And I failed." Thandi felt anger spark. "I didn't do it expecting repayment." "I know. That's why I'm here." Behind them, Lebo moved closer to Thandi, positioning himself at her side. A physical declaration of alliance. Daniel noticed immediately. Something in his expression softened. "I'm not here to take him. Or to demand anything from you. I'm here because a debt exists, whether you asked for it or not." Thandi's hands clenched. "I don't need charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering restitution." Daniel pulled a business card from his jacket, held it out. "But I need to ask you one question." Thandi took the card without looking at it. "What question?" He glanced at the closed shop visible through the window, at Lebo standing beside Thandi. "If you were to open again, if you had the capital to restart your business, where would you choose?" The question landed like a stone dropped into still water. She thought about the corner location she'd saved for, the spot with twice the foot traffic, the dream she'd built coin by coin. She thought about the empty shop across the street, marked by failure and sacrifice. She thought about Lebo's future. Thandi looked at Lebo. The boy's jaw was tight, eyes fixed on Daniel with wariness. But he didn't speak. He simply stood there, reminding her she wasn't alone. She looked back at Daniel, this man who'd appeared at the clinic and vanished, who knew Lebo's name but wouldn't explain their connection. "There's a location," she said slowly. "Near the main taxi rank. Better access to customers. But the rent is higher," Daniel finished. "Yes. More expensive. Also more profitable, if managed correctly." He waited, his expression patient but expectant, as if her answer mattered more than the simple logistics of business placement. "That's where I would choose," Thandi said. "The corner location near the taxi rank." Daniel nodded once, as if she'd just confirmed something he'd already suspected. "Then that's where we'll start." 5 weeks after Daniel Maseko had stood in her living room asking questions that felt like promises, Thandi received an envelope by courier. Inside lay 3 keys and documents. The lease listed her name, Thandi McQuena, as sole proprietor. The business license bore the same name. The registration confirmed a corner space near the main taxi rank. She read the fine print 3 times. The rent was paid for 12 months. The utilities transferred to her name. Registration fees handled. No conditions attached. Lebo watched from the doorway, his posture careful. "He did it. The shop. It's ready." Lebo's jaw tightened, shoulders drawing up defensively. "What does he want?" "Nothing. Just my name on the lease. People like him don't give things for free. He calls it restitution. For what I spent at the hospital." Thandi looked down at the keys. I don't know what else to do but try. She walked to the shop the next morning, keys gripped tight, Lebo beside her in heavy silence. The location sat exactly where she remembered, corner position with visibility from 3 directions. Thandi unlocked the gate with shaking hands, then opened the door into a space that smelled of fresh paint. Someone had cleaned every surface. The shelving stood sturdy, professionally installed. The counter refinished. The floor showed no cracks. Daniel had called it a replacement for what was lost, not a gift. The distinction mattered. A gift created debt. A replacement acknowledged loss and attempted to restore equilibrium without demanding thanks. Lebo found a broom and began sweeping with methodical attention. His movements held careful precision, but something had shifted. He still checked the door, eyes tracking the entrance with habitual vigilance. But he did it more slowly now, with less urgency, as if the compulsion to map escape routes was losing its grip. This is really ours? No one's going to take it back? The lease is in my name. Paid for a year. Lebo's grip tightened on the broom handle, knuckles white. You keep saying we, but it's your shop, and you're part of this. Have been since the day you walked into the old shop. Lebo's grip tightened on the broom handle, knuckles white, but he didn't argue. Just kept sweeping as if the act might make it real. 3 days later, Daniel appeared at the shop during late afternoon, standing in the doorway. Watching Thandi arrange inventory on shelves she'd begun to stock with money borrowed from neighbors. Miss McQuena, Mr. Maseko. He stepped inside, eyes moving across the space with practiced assessment. When his gaze landed on Lebo organizing canned goods in the corner, something in his expression softened before hardening again. Everything is in order? No issues? Everything is in order. Thank you. Daniel nodded. This isn't charity. I want to be clear. This is restitution for a responsibility I failed to meet. You saved his life with money you couldn't afford. I'm replacing what you lost. That's the transaction. Thandi looked at Lebo, who had stopped organizing and now stood watching Daniel with wary intensity. Why didn't you come sooner? When the costs were adding up. Daniel's jaw tightened, hands curling into fists before he deliberately relaxed them. Because I'm a coward. Because I told myself it wasn't my place. Because by the time I understood I was wrong, you'd already made the choice I should have made. He didn't elaborate, didn't explain his connection to Lebo. Just offered that admission and let it stand. Then he turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he paused without looking back. Good luck, Miss McQuena. I hope this works out. The black SUV pulled away into traffic and disappeared, leaving behind only the shop and the keys and the lease that said Thandi McQuena owned this space. The shop opened at dawn 2 days later. Thandi unlocked the gate while morning light was still gray, flipped the sign from closed to open, and stood behind the counter. Lebo swept the floor one more time, checked the door twice, then positioned himself near the window where he could see both street and interior. The first customer arrived at 6:15, a woman from the old shop who'd watched her fail and decided to give her another chance. Then another. Then 3 more before 7. By mid-morning, a steady trickle had established itself, buying bread and milk and basic necessities. This wasn't a rescue story. No sudden reversal of fortune, no miraculous salvation. Just a woman and a boy running a small shop in a township where most people barely got by, trying to build something that could last. Life continued, not transformed, not redeemed, just continuing with slightly better tools and a location that offered marginally improved chances. And in the gap between what had been lost and what had been replaced, Thandi and Lebo found something resembling ground. They could stand on without constantly checking to see if it would give way. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. And enough, for now, would have to be sufficient. Some choices come late in life. But they still define who we are. What would you have done? If this story moved you, please share it with someone you care about. And leave a comment below. Thank you for watching. This has been Golden Heart Stories.